Now, our first presenter is Peter Shergold, who ought to be known to all of you. After all, he was in charge of the public service for 20 years. You mightn't have noticed it, but that's what was happening in Canberra for a long time. This was the man that really went. This was Sir Humphrey par excellence. This was the man that really ran things. Peter, who's very bright, a couple of Fulbright scholarships. He came out of academia into the public service. He's done everything that you could do. He was Secretary of the Department of Prime Minister's Cabinet. And I'd have to, as I shared with him the thought that he exited at just the right time when things before things became very difficult. He's now Professor at the Australian School of Business, University of New South Wales, and he's a Senior Visiting Fellow of the Singapore Civil Service College. Peter, over to you.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Hugh always sets you at rest before you came on. I was standing in the wings, and I said with this microphone, I must say I'm standing here feeling a bit like an ageing pop star. Hugh Descent, who did do 20 years in the Commonwealth Public Service. Liberated, but I hope also reflective on the failures that I had during that 2 decades. And really, my interest is in why. And what I want to talk about is a complex adaptive system. Extraordinarily complex, unfortunately, not sufficiently adaptive. The system I'm talking about is participatory democracy. I want to suggest to you that its future is not assured. In my view, this is a system that is under pressure, increasingly fragile, and may not have the resilience to survive. Fortunately, there are extraordinary opportunities for renewal and reinvigoration. If, perhaps only if, we're willing to be creative and innovative. Now, what I want to do very quickly is throw what I think are 5 big ideas at you. First idea. Resilience theory finds its roots in the 1970s, originally applied to ecosystems, and a recognition that natural resource management isn't just about optimizing production and preserving the environment, as if the ecosystem is some sort of develops in a linear fashion to a stable end. Rather, resilience theory recognizes that nature and humans actually co-evolve, that the ecosystem is in constant flux, that the system is dynamic and therefore adaptive. But the other side of that coin of dynamism is that the systems are also volatile and turbulent and innately unstable. And therefore, even if you don't know resilience theory, you will know what I think is the most powerful metaphor of it, which is that systems can reach a tipping point at which they are no longer able to absorb further disturbance. The basic structures and functions collapse. And I want to apply this resilience theory to this other sort of complex adaptive system, the socio-political system that is political democracy, participatory democracy. Here's the problem as I see it. We're in strife even though we don't really recognize it. The normal, traditional vehicles for political engagement have collapsed. Only nerds now join political parties, and only because they want political careers. Other vehicles that used to be used for people to participate politically, trade unions, have significantly declined in membership over the last generation. You've got this continuing problem, extraordinary in such a wealthy society with such high levels of economic growth, a continuing problem of inequality and social exclusion. I'm going to come back to that. You've got increased geographic mobility over the last generation, so traditional networks of family and neighbourhood have broken down. Citizen expectations seem to be rising faster than the capacity of governments to be able to meet them. and global threats threaten the sovereignty of nation states, the issues that we face today, whether it's national security or environmental fragility, are not within the remit of any single nation state. So, hold that thought. Second thing I want to talk about is what's sometimes called the hollow state or the contract state. This is about and this you can date back, I think, to the early 1990s, contracts by which community organisations deliver government policy. Often this is criticised as some form of neoliberal agenda designed to weaken the role of government and enhance commitment to the market. So let me tell you, I was, still am, a supporter of outsourcing. I actually think this has been a great step forward. The way in which governments have been willing to use community organisations to deliver services has been more efficient and effective than previously, and because the people delivering services come from a position of the heart, they have empathy with those to whom they deliver services. Service standards have improved. Now, that's not my problem. My problem is this, that Meatloaf was wrong. And I know Meatloaf was one of the great 20th century philosophers. You may remember, I do as an ageing pop star, that Meatloaf said, I want you, I need you, I'm never going to love you, but 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Well, I've got to tell you, 2 out of 3 is pretty rotten. We've got greater efficiency of delivery, improved service quality, but the thing that excited me about outsourcing, should excite you about outsourcing on the contract state, is the ability to use this in order to create social innovation and public innovation. I thought, naive public servant that if you had a range of different organisations delivering, for example, employment services, they would start to do it in different ways. You would get social innovation. I didn't anticipate, naive as I was, that what would actually happen because of risk aversion is that the bureaucracy on behalf of ministers would so control and regulate the outsourcing that it didn't matter whether you were Therese Rain's work directions or the Salvation Army, your ability to innovate was extraordinarily limited. So that's my problem with it. And yet, and this is why I still get excited, unions, political party membership is declining. I've got good news. It's behind me. It's called 600,000 not-for-profit organisations. There is this wonderful, raucous cacophony of community endeavour. 85% of Australians are a member of at least one community organisation. And these are, at a fundamental level, political organisations. I'm not just talking about the World Wildlife Fund and the Australian Conservation Foundation. I'm talking about small community organisations where the people who join do not believe in any way they're being political, but they are starting to play a community and political role. Here is hope for the future. So, hold that thought too. Third big idea, co-production. Interestingly, I find its roots go back almost to the same emergence of resilience theory in the early 1970s. Nothing whatever to do with each other until today. And I'm trying to bring these together now. So what is this co-production about? Well, let me go back to something I mentioned in passing. The extraordinary difficulty of removing inequality, social exclusion and marginalisation from our democratic societies. And of course that has a huge impact, not just on the public purse, but in terms of community engagement and civic respect and all those important matters that actually support participatory democracy. Now, is it that governments haven't given a damn? No. The problem is that governments have given a damn and have been singularly inept, Commonwealth, state, across the political spectrum, of thinking how best to tackle social exclusion. So what has happened over and over again is governments have designed and public services have delivered programs to help those who are marginalised. It is designed programs to be delivered to recipients and dependents and cases to be managed and beneficiaries. Surprise, surprise. You deliver government programs to people who are dependents and treated as dependents. What happens? They become dependent. They actually learn helplessness and powerlessness. So many programs that were introduced with the best of motives that I had a responsibility of delivering with the best of intentions actually, ironically, ended up reinforcing the problem. Is there an alternative? Yes, I am delighted to say there is. It's called co-production, fancy word. What it means is that citizens who are receiving services have the ability, given the chance, to help design and deliver the services themselves. It is starting to happen. Starting to happen here in Victoria, just as in Western Australia, for example, with the delivery of services to people with a disability and their families and carers, where we say to these people, what is it that you need to live the full life? How would you like to design policies and programs for yourself? Co-production. Very exciting, I think. Hold that thought too. Fourth, I'm getting wackier. Apologies about that. Edge-centric government or network government. To properly engage the private and third sectors, to properly empower citizens and communities, you need, I think, new forms of government. To make this work, you need leadership that can understand that its key role is collaboration. It means seeing government not as a hierarchy, but as a network of partners in service delivery, policy development, program design. And to do that, second of all, you need what Martin Stewart Weeks has called edge centricity. You need to be able to devolve responsibility and authority from the centre. Fifth idea, and finally, wackiest of all, apparently, democratic dialogue. Here I have to say, thank you very much, Julia Gillard, for pulling the rug out from under my feet. If I talked about this 8 weeks ago, people thought it was wacky, but defensible. Now people just think it's wacky. And what I mean by that is Julia Gillard, of course, suggested one of the ways we should deal with the issue of climate change and a possible emissions trading scheme or a tax on carbon was to actually have a citizens' assembly. Well, said the old-fashioned broadcast media, what a wacky idea. You know, it's just a giant focus group. Please, let me tell you that it was the right idea, introduced for the right issue, but introduced at the wrong time, with the wrong motives, and with inadequate understanding. The fact is, there are exciting things happening at the moment, generated in part by social media, which do allow new forms of democratic dialogue which were unthinkable 10 years ago. And they are things like citizens' assemblies. And they are things like people's forums and citizen juries and citizen services and deliberative polling. And if you think I'm wacky, go and look at the little city-state of Singapore and look to the extent to which they are using these devices to help inform and develop policy. So those are my 5 ideas. Hold that thought, but not for long, because I'm not Mark Scott and I'm not going to get to him. I just want to try and pull these 5 thematic motifs together and say to you, if we can then produce a new democratic fabric, probably. Fibre is what Mark and I talked about, which will withstand the rips and tears of 21st century life. There are potential new forms of democratic discourse, not just more effective forms of government in the traditional sense, not just old-style government, which is tended to be a one-way process directed from the centre with the help and support of professional public services, subject to the occasional will of increasingly disillusioned voters. Rather, I see an opportunity for new-style governance based on interactive engagement, subject to the ongoing participation of citizens. I hope I've shown you enough to suggest that it is possible. What is happening, as so often in government, what is happening that is most exciting happens at the margin. If you want to look for anything creative and innovative in government, always look for the poorly funded pilot projects, because that's where you will find them in terms of co-production, in terms of engaging with not-for-profit organisations. My suggestion is that participatory democracy, this complex adaptive system, is genuinely at a tipping point. We can revitalise it and restore it, including the notion of citizenship at its core. All it needs is creative innovation and clear vision and courageous leadership. Thank you.